Hi, everyone, and welcome back to episode number 4 of the Cloud Chronicles podcast. My name is Stefan. I'm here with Puria, and today we will talk about some headlines. Claude Fable 5 got shut down by the government. We will talk about why and how that happened. SpaceX bought Cursor for $60 billion. Microsoft started eyeing a Chinese open-weight frontier model to replace OpenAI. And 3 new frontier models will be released in June or already got released. This and more things we will discuss in this episode, so buckle up. Hi, Puria, how are you doing?
Hey, Stefan, good to see you. How's it going?
Well, very hot here in Munich, Germany, but happy to have this episode here kicking off because I'm really, really excited about the news that came up in the past weeks.
Yeah, crazy weeks. And I was pretty amazed how easy Fable was released. And, in the last episode, we were talking about Mythos, that there was just a very tiny group of people in the US who had access to it. And then we got Fable 5, and then all these things happened in the last days. So a lot of ups and downs.
Yeah, and I mean, you jumped directly into it. So maybe for the listeners, let's give some background information or like chronologically explaining what happened. So on June 9th, Anthropic launched Claude Fable 5. So that was the first publicly available Mythos class model. So it's basically the Mythos model that is like a little bit more restricted version with more guardrails for all customers worldwide. And then Anthropic explicitly disclosed at launch that Fable 5 contains safeguards, right? So that maybe for some high-risk requests, it would route these requests to Claude Opus 4.8. So this happened under the hood secretly. This was already a headline by many customers saying that this was like happening secretly under the hood to route requests to a less capable model. So this was the first thing that happened. And then shortly after the launch of Fable 5, security concerns emerged around whether Fable 5 safeguards could be bypassed. And there are reports and indications on the internet that maybe Amazon CEO Andy Jassy was talking to the US government, that Amazon researchers found out that there are potential jailbreak vulnerabilities and that concerns were escalated to the US government. So then one day later, on June 12th and 13th, the US government imposed restrictions on access to Fable 5 and Mythos 5. And the reason for this was national security concerns. So there was not like a new law that came out, but like an existing law where they are saying that this is of national security or safety. So we need to shut down these models. And then Anthropic subsequently disabled both models worldwide except for US customers.
I found it quite interesting that this rerouting was happening under the hood. So, I mean, when it was announced, you saw that immediately it's going to consume twice as much tokens as Opus for 8. So, you made a conscious decision as a user to pick the Fable 5 model. And then afterwards, seeing that, it was also a little bit, I would say, interesting that this rerouting was happening. I mean, the security concerns are clear. I mean, it's one way for them also to control that people don't use it for harmful ways or used it for harmful ways to infiltrate maybe other systems. And then even this rerouting and probably guardrails they had in place seems to have not been enough to protect, as we had like this prompt injection possibilities that some researchers found. So, yeah, I mean, overall, I really hope we can get back access to these types of models. There were also some open source announcements, which we are going to discuss later. So we can see like the field isn't actually stopping. So this is probably just a temporary thing, I would say.
I mean, that is the first time now, Puria, that a government shuts down access to a model, right? So what do you think this means for sovereignty? Because there are many customers already thinking about setting up like a sovereign cloud environment. So what do you think this topic of shutting down a frontier model that many companies depend on means in like designing a sovereign strategy for your company?
It's a good question. I would say sovereignty is something that will never become super hard with AI because of the competition. So we have like a lot of open source labs. Here in Europe, we have Mistral, who are working continuously on releasing models as open source variants. And also the gap is narrowing. Like last year, we had like 12 months of difference between closed models and open source models. I think now it's just like few months. And later, when we also look at the benchmarks, you will actually see like you can actually pick the open source models and you get frontier experience. Maybe not like state of the art, but super close to state of the art. They are in most cases also much cheaper, like factor 5 cheaper. So with that, I think sovereignty is not as difficult anymore, maybe compared to a few years ago, where you really had to use the latest models. Otherwise, your agent even didn't work. So I think nowadays it's much easier.
Yeah. I mean, it shows that we might push for a European model, right? Like you mentioned Mistral. So I think we should definitely, like as European countries, should push for a European solution. It might not be the best model out there, but we should definitely have an alternative there. And if you look at the market in the past, it shows that like in 1 to 2 years, open weight models or other models like will keep up with the new frontier models that come out now. We don't know how it is now, so we don't know whether the Mistral models will be as capable as Fable in 1 or 2 years. We don't know that, but it shows that in a few years we will keep up with the US models, and we should definitely push for more investments into European solutions, because this is the only way how we can be on the safe side, because we don't know what the Chinese government is doing with the DeepSeek or Kimi models. We don't know what the US government is doing with Anthropic and OpenAI models. So we see there doesn't have to be a new law coming out to shut down models. It is enough for what happened now. Like we saw that the US government can restrict access and like verify it with national security reasons.
Very interesting angle. I really like that you also propose like to be really laser focused in terms of sovereign countries and really support, for example, local projects financially, but maybe also by design to also make sure that these models are always integrated into your architecture. One more thing that also comes into my mind is that when we ourselves build agents or work with customers to build agents, we really see like the performance is on the one hand not really exclusively bound to the model, but also everything you build around it. So how is your strategy with skills? How do you integrate data with the agent? How do you evaluate the agent to see that the performance is right and the job gets done? Or even token efficiency, so to not waste tokens, because also the state-of-the-art models are quite expensive. And I think this is also really important. And this is, for me, also part of sovereignty, I would say. And maybe also the other angle. So probably US stopped Fable 5 because they don't want like attackers to use the model to find vulnerabilities in other systems. So I think now it's even more important to secure our applications as part of our sovereignty strategy so that no one can infiltrate your systems by using state-of-the-art models. And I think this is also something that actually should be part of the complete picture.
And one result out of the Fable 5 shutdown is that we now have a vacuum in the market, right? So we had a very powerful model coming out that companies relied on, and now it got restricted and companies are waiting for the same powerful capabilities. And there are now like a number of different companies trying to fill that gap. GLM 5.2 got announced, OpenAI announced GPT 5.6, NVIDIA announced a new model, and so on. So we have a number of different companies now trying to fill that gap with their new models for companies to jump on the train and finding out that maybe they also offer cheaper or capable models that are as capable as Fable 5.
Yeah, so we are seeing a lot of movement in the market. We have, on the one hand, a potential release very soon by OpenAI with GPT 5.6. Also, their chief scientists mentioned that this is going to be a significant improvement over 5.5. So this kind of indicates that we are getting into the area of Fable 5, maybe even better in terms of agentic coding. And there are also some rumors around the specs. So this is not confirmed, but we can still share this in this round so that you at least the feeling that what might come up next. So what we can see like in online communities like X is that the context window size might be around 1.5 million tokens. Also, there is a stronger focus on agentic coding. So I can think that it's going to be also super optimized for codecs. So what we hear is like 2 or 5 times faster compared to the current version with GPT 5.5 where you have this fast mode. So this is already quite fast. And I think if it's even 2 times faster, this is already a lot. And when it comes to the API version where you pay token base for incoming and outgoing tokens, it is most probably 1/3 the price of Fable 5. And with that, now we can see that even OpenAI is now looking at cutting the cost and getting also into a price corner, much more closer to the open source models coming, for example, from the Chinese labs. Speaking about the Chinese labs, we have now a GLM 5.2, which just got announced on June 13th. And this model is above 700 billions of parameters, and it uses mixture of expert as an architecture model. So the total active parameters of this model are 40 billion. Now, the context window size is 1 million, and you can generate up to 130,000 tokens as output. Now, there are also rumors, or there were rumors before the model was released, that this is going to be on par with Fable 5. Now, the first benchmarks are out, and from what we are seeing, it's not exactly in the corner of Fable 5. It's very close to it, and we are also going to look at next into the artificial analysis leaderboard, where they have also calculated an intelligence index. And there we can also see like what is the difference in terms of latency, in terms of pricing, and get a good overview about the models we're discussing today, because these aren't just the only models which got released, which claim to be state-of-the-art or close to state-of-the-art. What also happened is we have now the release of Kimi 2.7. This one is also very close to the state-of-the-art models. I would say not as close as, for example, GLM 5.2 is compared to GPT 5.5, compared to Opus 4.8 or Fable 5. But still very close. And one thing which is really special about the Chinese models is the pricing and the latency. So typically they are 5 times or sometimes even more cheaper than the state-of-the-art US-created AI models. Also, NVIDIA is still releasing continuously new models. And when you watch the recent interviews of Jensen Huang, one thing that I found really interesting is that he's always mentioning that they are building hardware, but they're also spending a lot of money into their research labs, because they have always this mental model of co-building inside NVIDIA itself, so not only with their partners. So now, what I assume what this means, especially when it comes to LLMs, they always want to create LLMs also internally so that they have the maximum amount of experience internally. So to understand what are the next trends that you would need actually in hardware, so that also other labs benefit from NVIDIA's hardware architecture. So that's why we see that the NVIDIA models are maybe not always state of the art. So when we also look at the benchmark later, you will see Nemotron is a little bit behind the competitors, but it's not that far. And it also shows that NVIDIA is also optimizing a lot around latency. All right, so when you want to use the Nemotron model, compared to the other ones, typically what you do is you pick a self-hosted solution. So thinking of AWS, you can go ahead with SageMaker Jumpstart as one of the easiest ways. And when I recently checked it, you can, for example, pick the H200 instances, which is the P5 family on AWS, to host it. And with that, we come now to the European side of things. We have Mistral, who released the Devstral 2 model in June 12th. And this model is a little bit smaller, so it has around 123 billion parameters. The context window size is 256, and this one is optimized for coding. The pricing is quite optimized, so it's 40 cents for 1 million input tokens. And this is, again, the area of the Chinese frontier models that we are seeing.
So regarding the GLM release, I think it's not a surprise that Chinese companies trying, like right after the Fable 5 shutdown, trying to fill that vacuum with a new model, because the Chinese companies want to establish themselves, in my opinion, as the reliable partner for companies that are not getting shut down, that where companies can rely on, that where applications work safely. Before that, before the release of GLM, or like in the past year, China had 2 big frontier labs. So one was DeepSeek, that released its V4 Pro model in April 26. And then we had like Qwen from Alibaba. So, and now with Zhipu AI, we have like a 3rd frontier lab that releases its models that are very capable and can compete with the AI labs from the US, or might not be like on the same level, but maybe like close to it. And one thing that many companies that I work with choose is using, for example, DeepSeek out of cost considerations, because it is much, much cheaper. And Puriya just named it, that these Chinese models, like on average, are factor 5 cheaper than the models from Claude, for example. And for many companies, that's a legit reason to move to a Chinese company or Chinese model. And now if we factor in the reliability, that companies can say that the Chinese models are always available compared to the US ones, where we have a US government that might shut down the model, it is an additional reason to move to these models. And regarding Nemotron that you just mentioned, the new model released from NVIDIA, I think it clearly shows, and it goes across the market, that the big companies are innovating vertically, like Amazon having their own chips with Trainium, and now NVIDIA having Nemo Claw as their operating system for agents, and now releasing competitive open weight models at the market. I think it clearly shows that companies want to stay independent. And with Claude or Anthropic in general and OpenAI, they are building their own AI infrastructure data centers for running their models. I think it clearly shows that companies want to stay independent in the AI field or in the cloud industry in general to innovate independently and not like relying on their partners to deliver.
So when we look at the latest leaderboard, to be honest, this changes a lot throughout the days, but this is like the latest one as of today. And when we look at it, we have first off this intelligence index created by artificial analysis, which is used by the cloud vendors, but also by AI labs. So this kind of became one common ground where we all can align on to have a quick comparison about the models. So what we can see is, first off, they have this pricing methodology where they combine input-output token pricing in just one parameter. I found it quite helpful so that you don't have to compare two of them always. Now, when we look at the price, we can see, okay, Fable is quite expensive. So you have around $7 per 1 million tokens. But when it comes to the intelligence, it's still the highest ranking one. Now, when we look at it, the next two are Opus 4.8 and GPT 5.5. Now, from what we have heard, GPT 5.6 is probably aiming to go to the top position. And what is also important is to look at the latency. So from what we can see is, when we use GPT 5.5 with the maximum thinking mode, it seems, at least on this leaderboard, that the Opus 4.8 tends to be faster for the final response. Now, in terms of pricing, they are quite similar. But now what becomes interesting is GLM 5.2, because we talked about it today. Now, when we use that one in the maximum thinking mode, which is the most intelligence mode, in terms of intelligence is actually behind even Opus 4.7. But when we look at the pricing, we can see, okay, there is a huge difference. So here is even around factor 6 to 7 compared to Fable 5. Now, this is significant. And sorry, I highlighted the wrong row. So this one here. And even when we compare it to the GPT 5.5, we can see it's also around factor 4 cheaper. So much cheaper than the US-based models. And then in terms of latency, it's even slightly faster than the Opus 4.8. Now, what else did we look at today? I think what's worth to highlight is also the DeepSeek V4. Maybe not the latest model as of today. I mean, we have now very fast release cycles, so even April is now far ago. And when we look at it, okay, in terms of intelligence, even far behind the GLM 5.2, but the pricing is super, super good. I mean, it's even below 20 cents, as we can see here, for the total 1 million input-output tokens. Now, okay, es ist dieser Bug. Warte mal, ich muss kurz Screenshare stoppen. Gerade das mal einfach aus. So the pricing is super strong, and here we are even more than factor 5 cheaper than the US-based labs. Now, in terms of latency, it's a little bit slower than the GLM 5.2. So here I would say the decision would be definitely, if you want close to state-of-the-art model and with the lowest pricing, GLM 5.2 makes definitely sense. If you want to go even more down with the pricing, but don't want to lose as much intelligence as possible, then the V4 is definitely a good choice with the open source models. All right, so there were also some releases from XAI with the Grok models. And Stefan, you prepared something around it. Maybe it's next worth to look at this.
Definitely. And the new release of the Grok model goes hand in hand with SpaceX acquiring Cursor. So that happened on June 16th. Like just a few days after SpaceX recorded their new NASDAQ IPO. So the company is now valued at $2 trillion, I think. And like right after the IPO, SpaceX acquired Cursor for $60 billion. So Cursor becomes now a wholly owned SpaceX company or subsidiary. And this is now like the largest startup acquisition in history. So the question is, why did they do that? I mean, in general, Cursor is just a VS Code fork, right? And then you put an AI assistant on top, and now this is getting acquired for $60 billion. But there are a few other things behind it, because SpaceX now owns the AI model underneath, the training data pipeline. So all the Cursor sessions that developers executed, so how like the workflow looks like for the developers to build new features and release them, all of this is now owned by SpaceX for future model training and model releases. And this is 3 times more than like the current V8 small production model at 500 billion parameters. And the public release is targeted for mid of June, so it might come out like already came out when we release this podcast, or it will come out in the next days. And this is the first major AI consolidation where like the training data from real developer workflows, as I said previously, becomes like the proprietary mode. So for many companies now, they are thinking of when they have Cursor, and one of the main reasons for having Cursor is that they have like a variety of model choices, right? So now the question is, what is SpaceX doing? Will they enable Grok as the native model on Cursor for developers, like the default one? Or will they keep like, the idea of having like a variety of different models available on Cursor? And for SpaceX, the question is, of course, like also out of economical reasons, because xAI lost $6.35 billion last year. So every API call from Cursor now in the future to Anthropic models or to OpenAI models is lost revenue. So the company needs to decide what we're doing with the new acquisition, whether we keep it open or whether we want to push more for their own Grok model. But maybe this discussion will be off the table if Grok will be trained with the new training data, with all the developer workflows and the developer sessions from Cursor. Maybe if Grok becomes like the go-to developer model, because it's just much better than the Claude models or GPT models, maybe it like becomes the default model just by choice from the developers.
I also find that really interesting, also with this actually latest loss that xAI made with their models. And what also happened simultaneously was the release of Grok on Amazon Bedrock. So it kind of feels like that now xAI also feels ready enough or open enough to also resell more proactively their model. And I think now the timeline with the release on Bedrock and then at the same time also the acquisition of Cursor really shows that Grok is now really becoming an important model choice for agentic coding. And I think but this is like what I'm assuming for the future or my personal forecast. I think it's going to be too aggressive. So if actually Cursor just would have like the Grok family only, but I can imagine that this becomes like the default choice. So when you open up Cursor, it's always pre-selecting Grok, and then you have like to proactively go ahead and then select other models. I think this is going to happen for sure. And this should probably already change a lot of user behavior if the model delivers. So this is also important to observe within the next weeks. And I think overall it's a good news. I mean, we have now even more model choice. So now we have Gemini, we have OpenAI Codex, we have the Opus family, or maybe Fable, future ones to come. Now we have even Grok as a serious alternative, and the Chinese models as open source, and Mistral. So I think this is quite nice, and hopefully this also helps us to get more smaller models, which we can even run on our even smaller models, which we can run on our own laptop. So this is kind of free tokens. You could say you just pay the electricity bill, and yeah, and then even running agents is now becoming more and more cheaper. So this trend is ongoing. I think this is great. Yeah, more competition is always better for the end user. I got one more topic I wanted also to share with you today, Stefan. So what happened recently is that there are also now more and more, from what we saw last time with the OpenAI harness architecture and sandboxing, there are now more and more of these examples. So we had the announcement from Anthropic, who now also released a paper like a few weeks ago about separating the brain and the hands. So like 1 or 2 years ago, the hands were just API calls and the brain was the LLM. And this was the simple definition of an agent. Now we talk about meta harness architecture. So this means that brain is actually the LLM plus the orchestration layer. So how does the agent, for example, compact its context to be efficient so that it can work longer on tasks, so maybe for even multiple hours? On the other hand, how does it call tools? How does it work with multiple agents? How does it delegate tasks to other agents. So all these things fall into the section of orchestration. And nowadays we call this harness because this is a bigger area. But at the same time, we separate where the agent is actually executing. So where the hands of the agent are working. And this is the sandbox. So it used to be just using Sandbox for executing a little bit of Python code, but now it's like what we had with OpenCloud for the first time. It's actually a fully functioning machine. Of course, in a cloud world, it's a virtual machine that you can host remotely. And in there, you can give the agent more capabilities. What has now become the standard is shell execution, access to file system, even deploying apps and exposing them with a URL so that you can actually open the browser and access the application, a web application that your agent is building. And with that, now these agents become long-running assistants. And now what we see is from cloud providers like AWS, but also like Azure, we see that they are supporting the harness architecture. So if you have, for example, agent core runtime, where you can select harness solutions, even, for example, you can use OpenAI Codex as a harness. You can also use the native harness of AWS. And we see also, for example, Azure, who are now bringing up dedicated sandbox solutions with MXC from Azure. So this is then a Windows sandbox solution that you can pick. And then there are even new startups who are just focusing on building sandbox for agents. So now this is becoming a big economy, and it's very interesting to see. So it's not like a small example anymore. Now this is the state of the art. And we will also plan now in the next sections more and more deep dives about very specific components of agents. So for example, the harness sandbox architecture, but we will also want to look more into other sections. And I think you had also something around the semantic layer when you told me earlier.
Yeah, and I think that goes hand in hand a little bit with the whole topic about sandboxing, because what we see currently at the market is that a lot of providers offering different solutions, like AWS has Agent Core, what is like a dedicated Firecracker micro VM for your sandbox agent. And then OpenAI Bot Owner now, what also gives OpenAI the chance to run their agents in their environment. And now Microsoft with MXC, Anthropic has also Claude managed agents. You see that the providers trying to own where the agents run. And the swappable part is the model. And AWS tries to stay harness agnostic, so you can run whatever harness you want on Agent Core. Now, one topic when you run your agents in like whatever environment you want to have is the whole topic around context. Providing agents enough context that they can be powerful enough to provide you the necessary information. And context comes from data. The most data in companies are spread across a number of different data silos. It can be in your Databricks environment. It can be in Snowflake. It can be in your S3 data lake. It can be managed by your Glue data catalog, and so on. And now the question is, how can you make an agent capable in accessing all of the different data silos, making sure that it reasons and gives you the right data output? The whole thing that this comes down to is building a semantic layer on top of your business records that makes sure the agent has enough context to know where it has to look. Let's take as an example, if you want to instruct your agent to give you metrics about customer revenue, how does the agent know where to look? How does the agent know what revenue means? What is a customer in terms of your Databricks environment or in your finance department or in customer support? So what customers are seeing across the board in every industry is that agents need to have the right context and the right business data in order to make valuable decisions. And this is where the semantic layer comes into play. And AWS released a couple of new features at the New York Summit, something called AWS Context. What will be a new feature, it is now a pre-announcement, so we don't have a lot of information about it, but it's basically a knowledge graph for agents to understand the business context of data. So instead of just like trying to find the revenue for your customer, it actually gets information about what revenue means. What is the difference between net revenue and revenue after taxes, for example? So all of these information will be saved in the semantic layer, and AWS Context will be one part of a semantic layer. And maybe stopping here, and Puria, I think this makes sense to have another deep dive session only about what a semantic layer is and how it can benefit agents to give like a more deterministic and more valuable output to the user.
I love that. So let's definitely do that in the next episode. So we can also now start our new format with more deep dives. Yeah, and with that, I think we had a very great session today with a lot of new insights. And thanks a lot, folks, also for tuning in. And see you definitely in the next one. And thanks a lot, Stefan. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Boria. Pleasure as always. Take care.